Hello, hello, and welcome to Saturday Soundbites. I'm your host, Veronica Sofer, and I am thrilled to be here with you again this week to talk about all things visibility strategy. Here on Saturday Soundbites, we talk about branding, marketing, advertising, networking, a little bit of mindset because that's always important too. And then I bring on some phenomenal guests that have a background in this space that are doing really fantastic things and have great projects out there. And today my guest is amazing. I've known her for years, and I can't wait for you to hear her story because she is a true storyteller in every sense of the word. And as storytellers, there's a lot of different ways we get our stories out there. And today we're going to talk about self-publishing and how to navigate through that process. But a little bit of housekeeping. If you're watching on Facebook, make sure you give us a comment so that Vanessa and I can communicate with you and engage. If you catch us on the replay, hashtag replay. But if you're listening on the podcast, which is always something we want you to do, make sure you hit subscribe because we don't want you to miss any episodes. So let's go ahead and get started today. My guest is Vanesa Salinas, and she is joining us today from the DFW area. She is a fantastic writer, and I'm just thrilled to have her on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Veronica, for having me. It's nice to see you.
We haven't actually seen each other or talked with voices in about 10 years. So this is just a treat for us.
It is.
So I'll confess, I do bring on a lot of journalists, and I have a lot of journalists or former journalists that have found new paths and new ways of sharing their talents with the world, and you are one of those people. So tell us about how you went from being a journalist, especially in the Spanish language media, to being a teacher, and now being a publisher and author.
Yes, well, it all started, at such a young age. I knew, that I love to write. I mean, I would write poems, little stories here and there. And I knew I wanted to do something. And as you know, I ended up, becoming a journalist, and it was a print media. I worked at newspapers. And I was happy doing it, writing on a daily basis. But, in 2009, when the recession hit, I got laid off. So I was at a point where I was like, what am I going to do? And back then I was covering a lot of education stories. So I went in and I, ended up going into the classroom. I switched careers. I became a bilingual teacher, and I loved it. But there was always that missing part. I wasn't writing on a daily basis, so I missed that. So I eventually started, writing a book, and it was my first book, and that was published a few years ago. Very different book. It had a Texan feel. It was all in English. It was not bilingual, but I was kind of, based on the path I was going, and trying to publish it, at that time I could only do it in English. I didn't have the opportunity to do a bilingual book.
Hmm.
So, fast forward to now, I'm working on this series, and for Paloma Latina Books, and very different, and doing the whole process is very different now.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty much combining that, my writing, being in the classroom, combining all of that. And now I have a daughter, so she's been the inspiration, to all of this.
And that's always the case, right? We get inspired by the things we love the most. So tell us a little bit about the transition and what the impetus was. I mean, obviously you're a storyteller, you were a writer, you were doing daily assignments, you had deadlines, you transitioned into the classroom, and you lost that desire, or you lost the ability to write on a daily basis. How did you start incorporating that such that you were able to put a book together? Because that's always a question people, aspiring writers, have. How do you make it a daily habit? How do you actually sit down and do it?
It's pretty much making the time. I mean, when I first started teaching, it was very difficult because I was trying to figure out teaching in itself. It was something very new. I mean, I went from, like you said, writing on a daily basis and being in an office to being in a classroom with students. I did at the time teach fourth grade, and, we did do some writing in fourth grade, well, a lot of writing. So, I was helping kids at that time, learn how to write, stories. But then, learning, a new field, I did not really have the time, to do it. And then finally, a few years later, I sat down and I was like, I have an idea. And it's interesting because, my first story ever as an intern, journalist, was on a little black bear. So one day I was like, I am going to write a story with a Texan feel, and it's going to be about a little black bear. So that's how that came about, So that's why it's like a Chico bear, and
Mhm.
his Texas adventures. So that I just set up a time back then, and I started writing, and then I got my former editor involved. I was like, hey, can you help me out a bit? I have my draft here. Let's start working on this. I want to publish it. So it was pretty much just trying to make some time to write. And
Mhm.
back then it was a little bit easier, obviously. Now, I mean, everything right now, I still have my full-time career right now. I work as a specialist, in a bilingual department here. So have full-time career, my family,
Yeah.
and navigating, the self-publishing world as well.
Yeah, which is really the crux of what it is we want to share with people today. Tell us about how you figured out self-publishing was for you, because there's generally a couple of different ways books get published, and we've got the traditional model that a lot of people are used to or they know about. But with the advent of on-demand printing, that's changed. How did you figure out how that was right for you, and what were some of the lessons learned through that process?
Yes, definitely. Well, when I started doing research back then, I quickly realized that I could not do the traditional route. I did not have time to, submit a manuscript, wait a few months, see if it was even going to get picked up or not. Then I realized, well, there's self-publishing companies. So I started doing some research, and I was like, okay, this can work for me. So when I was getting ready, to find, a self-publishing company, that's when I found out that I was pregnant. So it took me a long time to get that completed because,
Mhm.
I was going through the pregnancy, the first trimester, you know how that goes. So, it didn't get published till my daughter was 1 already. It took some time because I wasn't used to working with people online through email.
Mhm.
So, and keep in mind, this was a few years ago. This was about 6 years ago, I wanna say, and I still see it as very different compared to what I'm doing now.
Mhm.
But I did find a company, and, I ended up prolonging it because I had to do a lot of the stuff online, submit this and that, and then I'm trying to navigate pregnancy, then a newborn. So, the good thing it was that self-paced,
Yeah.
but I also learned what I did not want to do, you know, this time around, because at that point in time, I was like, okay, I've done one book, you know, we'll see where this goes.
Mhm.
But it was one of those things where research was the one that brought me to the self-publishing world because I hadn't even heard about it back then.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably really, I mean, you probably used your journalism background to navigate the research part, know what was credible, and figure out what companies are available. So now that you published your first book, and then you started with a series. What are some of the things that you mentioned that have been different this time around? What were some of the lessons learned, or not, I wouldn't necessarily mistakes that were made, but mistakes that really helped you get to this point in a positive way?
Well, I knew that this time around, I needed to make sure that, whoever I was going to go with, because I was going to do the same thing. I was going to go through a self-publishing company, and I was researching companies because, when I got the book, I was like, this could have been very different. I mean, it's a very good book, but I don't think, the whether it's like the layout, the way they laid it out, the quality. I was like, this could have been a lot better.
Mhm.
So I am going to do research on all sorts of self-publishing companies. Well, because it's also financially, I mean, it does cost, money, to get it self-published. So
Mhm.
you're looking, financial, the quality, looking through reviews, making sure, like you said, that they're credible. And, I found one and I was so excited. So I gave them a call, and then I was like, okay, the customer service wasn't, what I thought
Mm.
it would be.
Mhm.
And, they're like, "Okay, just leave a message, we'll call you back." And they didn't call back, so I was like, "Okay, let me give them another call." And again, I just didn't feel like, they were excited about this as I was excited.
Mhm.
So, you know, um, one thing I learned from my brother, because I gave him a call and he works, in business and on, and one thing he said that stuck with me was, you know, the way they treat you is the way they're going to treat your book.
That's
You
right.
know? So I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And I was like, I did not like how they treated me. So what makes me think that they're going to treat my book that's so dear to my heart, that I worked hard
Absolutely.
for, So when I saw that and I was like, okay, let me go back, do more research. And then I started finding, how you can publish your own books too. And I was like, okay, well, this is a game changer.
Yeah.
So then I started shifting my research to, how can I publish my own book? So it's like one thing led to another, and everything was based on research. And so I had to take time, late at night, trying to do the research, figuring out, okay, now how am I going to self-publish? Because this sounds, better and financially speaking, more affordable because
Mhm.
you're doing the legwork. Now, the thing is, you are doing all the work. You
Right, right.
can't
The work still
just
gets done.
it still gets done, So it was doing research. Okay, so I need to self-publish. Okay, where can I go to self-publish? What works for me and what I'm looking for. Then you're going into, okay, I need an ISBN. I need to copyright, So there's a lot of different things. You need your illustrator. Like, where am I going to find an illustrator? There's a lot of research done, and that's how I came about it. And then I'm like, okay, you know what? If I'm going to do this on my own, might as well do my own little business, and that's when I was like, okay, now I'm doing research on how to, like, do my own business. Let's go to the county office, let's register, so it's been quite the process and it's been long, but I thought to myself, I'll do all the legwork right now. But once I get this one book done, it'll be easier because I'll know what to do. And then I'll have my own little business and all my series, and anything that I do with this can be housed all under my own little business.
Mhm. Yeah, and so the name of your company is Paloma Latina Books.
Yes.
And, tell us a little bit about that and, the significance, because as someone who has been in the education space, someone who has struggled with finding books that are culturally, aligned to some of the things that I wanted for both myself and then just for my daughters as well, it's a pretty profound thing to do to start your own publishing company, but then also to align it in such a way that people are automatically have an expectation of what you're publishing.
Yes, and it started again, when I was trying to find books for my daughter, when she was a baby, I was trying to get her little library done, and you do find some Spanish books, but it's very difficult to find one, a book that's bilingual, bilingual book, two, a book that, reflects our culture, and I found some books, but they're pretty much the books that have been translated. And,
Mhm.
like I was saying, it's like when you go into a bookstore, first you need to find the Spanish section. And when you find it, it's not a massive section. It's just a fraction,
Mhm.
there. And then to find a book that you find it relatable to yourself, it was difficult, So as she started growing up, I was like, I want to share that with her because even our upbringing is very different. I grew up in a border town. So back then when I was little, I didn't know I was immersed in the culture.
Mhm.
Obviously, here in North Texas, it's very different. I cross the border every week to visit grandma. I mean, I knew back home it's Spanish all the time. You have the music, and our upbringing is so different. So I wanted to make sure I found a way to connect that with her. And one of the things, we do, and when my mom is here as well, or when we go visit, we're in the kitchen. So we're doing, food, cooking, whatever. And I have her, it's kind of a couple of reasons, I have her there. One, I want her to become independent and that she knows how to cook when she's older. Now, she's not in the stove,
Yeah.
but she does help out, but we do try to do, like, for example, the first book that I'm gonna about to publish, it's on buñuelos, okay? So we do make buñuelos, we're there and we're making them. So I'm trying to tie it in, so that's how, the book series came about between her, the culture, sharing our beautiful culture. It's so rich, with our traditions and
Mhm.
all, sharing it with her, in the kitchen, but also sharing it with the world. and even, people that are not aware, sharing it with them as well,
Mhm.
and helping our kids see themselves, in a book when they're reading it, or say, okay, this is the way it is, so yeah, it all started with her, and how I did not find, the books that I wished I could have found. It's getting better, more and more I find more books here and there, but I think there's still a lot of work to be
Yeah.
done for it.
Well, and I love that, and I love the food connection, and I'll tell you why, because, for those of you listening on the podcast or watching, buñuelos are a dessert. They're usually, they're they've got cinnamon and sugar. It's a light pastry type, but there are similar, and this is why I think this is important. There are similar type desserts in different cultures. I have a friend who's Vietnamese, and they have a dessert that's very similar, and then I have a friend who's Indian, and in the Indian culture, they have a dish that's very similar too. And so what I love about what you're talking about is when children can not only find books that they can relate to for their culture, they can share it with others who have similar, it may not be exact, but
Mhm.
similar type things about their culture that really just starts that conversation. Um, and I love that that's what books do. And I love that the example you gave is exactly what we're trying as parents to broaden all of our children's horizons and their exposure because they live in a global world now.
They do, and it was, like, one thing led to another, when I started writing this book. I knew I wanted to do something, because I saw the need, and it didn't take for, I had it in my mind, but, if you don't put it in pen and pencil, I mean pen and paper, it's not gonna happen,
Mhm.
you have to make it happen. Nothing's gonna get done if you don't try.
Right.
So, I had it in my mind, but, I just never made the time. You get busy with everyday life, and there was just one day that I had such a bad day from
Oh,
beginning to end,
oh,
and I hadn't written in a while, so when everyone was asleep, I got my laptop and I typed a sentence, and then that sentence became a paragraph, and I was like, "I think I've got something here," so I just kept going and going, and that's how this book came about. Well, when it was still in the rough draft phase, I thought, okay, what about, the series? And then my second book, it's Pan de Muertos. And the reason I thought about that, again, it's a couple of things. One, obviously, it's a tradition that we have, the altar. But it's such a difficult, topic to discuss with a kid. And it
right.
wasn't until I had my own that I realized, how do you discuss this topic with a child?
Mhm.
So this book, actually, I already wrote it, it's already
Oh,
ready.
fantastic.
Yeah, so after this one, I should be getting the illustrations this weekend for this one, and it's almost ready to publish. So the second one is ready, but obviously I still need to go through the illustration process, what have you, but that one, it's so, like, to me, so heartwarming because you it discusses the topic, in a very light-hearted way, but you're also talking about the pan de muerto, the altar, so it's a very sweet, sweet book. Um, and again, and that one I feel it has even more because we're talking about, the altar, and we're
Mhm.
talking about, the pan, and, then we're talking a little bit about, these are our loved ones,
Mhm.
they're still
Mhm.
here with us, so but it's very lighthearted because I thought to myself, "Oh my god, that, like, this is such a difficult topic,
Yeah.
for a kid, and
Yeah.
how do you
No,
do it?"
I think the fact that you're able to and that's the beauty of being a journalist and have being a storyteller and then also being a teacher is you know how to synthesize stories in a way that speaks still conveys the message and the point, but speaks to them in a place where they're at. And that's really that's a gift. So I think I'm so excited to read it. I can't wait for it to be published.
Thank you.
It's gonna be great. So now that you've got the publishing company, you've done all the research, you've established it, you've figured out lessons learned. You mentioned previously, we were off camera talking about the importance of contracts and logistics. What are a couple of other tips that you think other people should think about as they're considering self-publishing? And then, what are some of the things you plan on doing next with that?
Definitely. Well, once you wanna do this, have a plan. It doesn't always work out, you know? have plan A, plan B, plan C, because I mean, I had my plan, but I had a huge hiccup, and it was a struggle to where I almost gave up.
Oh,
And it was one of those things where book one was ready, we're ready for book two, but we couldn't get, that sorted out. So then I had to start from scratch all over again with book one because it is a series. It needs to be uniform. It can't look different if it's a
absolutely.
series. So I had to start from scratch.
Oh,
And so one thing is, have your plan, have a backup plan. Don't quit. I almost quit, but don't, because and that's one thing that I always teach my daughter, when you fall, you need to get right back up. So I also couldn't teach her, like, it's okay for me to give up, you
yeah.
know? So it's not an easy process, it does take work, but if you have your plan written out, it'll be better. You have your vision, you have a goal, and even that goal changes. Like I
Mhm.
had a goal when I first started, and it has changed a couple of times since,
Sure.
because I'm now thinking of other ideas of how I can even expand my brand,
Mhm.
between the books, other products, merchandise, but always being authentic, coming back to being authentic, making sure that we are highlighting our culture, our traditions, our language, because my products are going to be bilingual,
Mhm.
Spanish and English, making sure, that if you're going to get a book, you're going to get it in both languages, not just in one, or that you
Mhm.
have to buy two books, the one in English, one in Spanish. The whole point is always making sure you have that goal. It can change, but always go back to, what is my purpose? I want to share this culture with the world.
That's
I
right.
want our kids to see themselves, in these books, other kids to learn about our culture,
Mhm.
you know? So that's very important. We're discussing contracts. Contracts are so important, and it's something that I wouldn't have thought about, but it did save me. I've done business without a contract. I've done business with a contract, and oh my God, the difference,
Right.
there's plenty of templates, get some ideas online, write it out, figure out, what you need, make sure it's very detailed to where there will be no questions asked afterward. If something goes down, you always go back to your contract. You can refer to your contract and it's like, okay, we both signed it, we both dated it. This is where we're at. Okay.
Mhm.
Contracts are so important, whether you're working with family, with friends, someone you don't know, have that ready,
Mhm.
and make sure it's, aligned, very detailed because it is very important to have that ready. Um, and make sure you give a copy to whoever you're working with, and even with when you're working with people, research, what have you, I mean, I've met several people, and it's great working with people, but just make sure you also know who you're working with,
Mhm.
and because that it's very important because you're relying on other people too, to get your product done.
Absolutely.
So it's one of those things where I've worked so hard for it. I need to make sure that whoever I'm working with feels as passionate, as I am for what you're working with. That
Mhm.
they understand and have clarity as well, and how you want your product done at the end of the day. um, Let me see.
Well, and you talked about branding, and so I'm really curious. As a self-publishing person, as someone in the self-publishing space, the marketing is all on you, right? It's not like there's a you just call the office and they assign you a publicist. You are the publicist. How does that work for you? And what are some of the things that you've felt like have gone well with marketing the book, or do you have an advertising budget? How have you, in particular, found success in sharing about your books?
Right now, I have no budget for it, but the beauty of nowadays we have social media.
Right.
So social media to me, it's still kind of like I'm still learning it. I'm learning as I go. And right now, I have my Instagram and I have Facebook. Eventually, I'll obviously get into TikTok, what have you, but I'm also going to do it the old-fashioned way to where getting a press release
Yep.
written out, send it to newspapers. I still believe in newspapers, TV stations, what have you. If I do plan eventually, depending on how you know health-wise, how everything pans out, when I have the books published, maybe have, like, a book reading or going to a library, everything is about exposure, making connections, talking to
Absolutely.
people. I mean, I still know people, in the journalism industry, that can help me out, and I'm tapping them, "Hey, can you help me out?"
Yeah.
Help me out, how to write a press release, even though I've seen them and everything, I still have, I have a very close friend who, still works in, marketing, and, she'll help me out, with the branding, what have you, giving me tips and all that. So, don't be afraid to, tap your friend's shoulder and
That's
say, "Hey,
right.
I need some help. Please
That's
help me out."
exactly right. Well, and the beauty of it too is that you're in the education space, in the bilingual space. For those people who have written children's books, do you have any insight into how most authors are successful in marketing to schools? And that's and the big reason why is because oftentimes they feel passionate about the story. There's always a lesson learned in the story, and they want to share it with people. I mean, I know people aren't writing children's books to make millions of dollars. Uh, they're doing it because it's a passion for them. How do you, on the other side of the table, in the school space, how do you determine what makes a good book and one that you would support for your bilingual program?
Like if I'm going specifically, for our, bilingual program and kiddos, the one thing, like I said, that I'm always going to have is making sure it is a bilingual book, making sure it's a book where kids can see themselves, something that they'll be like, oh, I know what she's talking about. Obviously, like this series, it revolves around, Palomita and her abuelita, and the bond that they have, how many kids spend so much time with their abuelitas, you know, how many kids, know about posadas, or they don't, what have you, but something that is relatable to the kids.
Mhm.
I know when I was in the classroom and I was writing the first book, I told my students, "Hey, I'm writing a book." And they were so excited. It was one of those things where they're like, "Oh, like how and this and that. ¿Cómo lo está haciendo, maestra?" Like so, it does generate, enthusiasm on the kids' part, Um, and you can even tap, if have any connections at a school or even the school district. It's like, hey, I'm coming up with this book. Is there a way that I can come and read to the children or what have you? When I was teaching, we brought in an author, and he brought copies of his books and he read to the kids, and he was an illustrator as well. So he did a few illustrations there.
Oh, fun.
Yes, it was real fun for the kids, and I remember talking to him, after the fact and trying to get some feedback or information regarding, the self-publishing. But yeah, I mean, it's totally doable, and I mean, what a better way, kind of escape.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly the right way, and I love that you gave those tips because I know, when I've talked to children's book authors, they often want to know, "Well, what's the best way?" "Should I talk to my sister-in-law? She's a teacher." I'm like, "Absolutely. Talk to everyone that you know because they're hungry to bring in real world examples of how you can be successful, how you can use your skills, and kids need to see that it's possible to have a dream and then have it published in on paper." So I think that's a great idea. So Vanessa, before I let you go, tell us how we can find you on social media. You mentioned Instagram and Facebook. How can people connect with you?
Yeah, send me a message or follow me. I'm under Paloma Latina Books, both Facebook and Instagram. Eventually, later on, I'll, delve more into more social media. It keeps on
Take your time.
changing.
You're good. Take your time.
It keeps on changing. So yes, follow me, send me a message. I'll be happy to connect with everyone. As of now, I'm hopefully within the next 2, 3 weeks or month. We'll have the first book published. Second one is already ready to get the ball rolling on that. So yeah, there'll be plenty of more to come for Paloma.
That's awesome. Well, I can't wait to reconnect because I will definitely be keeping up with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Veronica. It was very nice seeing you.
Thanks so much. All right, guys. With that, we're going to wrap up this episode of Saturday Soundbites. I hope you took notes. Those of you who are anxious to learn more about the self-publishing world, sounds like you need to make sure your contracts are in place, that you do your research. Research is very important, and you connect with others who are doing what it is you want to do. So I highly encourage you to reach out to Vanessa. You can find her at Paloma Latina Books on both Instagram and on Facebook. So we are going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. If you are watching on Facebook, Facebook and catch the replay, hashtag replay, so Vanessa and I can go back and answer any questions you might have. If you're listening on the podcast, make sure you hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes of Saturday Soundbites where we talk all things advertising, networking, branding, visibility strategy. It's all connected and it will all help you grow your business. So, with that, I am sending you lots of positive energy and light.